Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from another former senior officer of the London Fire Brigade. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Mr. Scott Hayward, please.
Good morning, Mr. Hayward.
Good morning, sir.
I understand you're going to make the affirmation.
Yes, sir.
The words are on the screen. Would you please read them out?
Yes, sir. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, please sit down and make
you.
yourself comfortable. Right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, good morning. Can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations? We're extremely grateful to you.
Thank you.
My questions are intended to be short and simple. Sometimes they don't quite work out that way. So if you would like me to ask the question again or to rephrase it, I'm happy to do that. Can I ask you also, please, to keep your voice up so that the person who sits immediately to your right can get down everything you are saying. Also, not please to nod or shake your head. A simple yes or no will do, because a nod or shake of head does not go onto the transcript.
Okay.
We will be taking scheduled breaks during the course of the morning and the afternoon during your evidence, but if you feel you need a break at any other time, then please just say and we can take a break.
Okay.
Now, you've provided 3 witness statements to the inquiry. I just want to show them to you first, if I may. The first is dated the 30th of April 2019, which you signed on the 1st of May 2019, and that is at LFB 3055191. Is that your first statement?
It is.
Can we look at page 43, please? Is that your signature above the date?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. The second is LFB 000862213. Is that your second statement to the inquiry?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And if you go to page 22, you can see a signature above the date there. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
9th of January 2020. Third is your statement of the 16th of June 2021 at LFB 001211176. Is that your third statement to the inquiry?
Yes, it is.
And it's dated the 16th of June. If you go to page 20, you'll see a signature there. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Have you read each of these witness statements recently?
Yes, I have.
Can you confirm that the contents of each of these statements are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I do.
Are you happy for those statements to be taken as your evidence to the inquiry?
Yes.
And have you discussed your evidence today with anybody before coming here today?
No.
Now, I'm going to ask you first about your professional background and your role at the LFB. In your first statement at paragraph 8 at page 2, if we can go to that, you say that before you joined the LFB, you served in the Royal Navy, where you had been a chief petty officer in the Warfare Department. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in the same paragraph, you say that the role you applied for at the LFB was as Operations Room Manager, which had been your title on seagoing ships. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, looking at your role at the LFB, you say that you joined as Principal Controller in August 2006. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then in May 2009, your title changed to Principal Operations Manager, or POM, or perhaps POM. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And that was your title, I think, until you left the LFB in July 2019. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what were your main responsibilities as Principal Operations Manager?
I was responsible for the day-to-day running of the control room and for the efficient service delivery of that.
If we go to paragraph 10 of your first witness statement, you say this. If we just scroll down to page 3, you say, although my titles have changed over time, my role in control has remained broadly the same: to manage the day-to-day control room functions and to ensure an efficient and effective 24/7 emergency response service. And now, when you say a day-to-day management of control, what do you mean by that?
To ensure that the control room runs efficiently 24/7.
And does that include things like staff rostering?
Yeah, I mean, the staff rotas are pre-planned, but of course changing rotas and the like will be part of that role, yes.
Right. What did you consider were your primary functions?
Service delivery to ensure that we could respond to any incident in London 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Now, you were in charge of the LFB control room from May 2009 to July 2019. That's 10 years, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Now, at paragraph 9 of your statement, if we can go back to that and look at the second bullet point there on page 2, you say that your role involved, you could see there, your role involved line management responsibilities. I'm summarising, but that's right, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah.
Now, I think you line managed a number of people, including Lindsay Turner.
Correct.
Joanne Smith.
Yes.
Victor, is it Baniel or Bagnall? Bagnall. And Keith Diamond, yes?
Correct.
Now, those people were, I think, senior operations managers. Or
They
SOM.
were indeed.
Yes. Were there any other members of the control staff that reported directly to you during that 10-year period?
Adam Crinion, who was another senior operations manager.
And he came in, I think, in 2017.
He did indeed, yeah.
Yes. Anybody else?
Not that I recall directly, no.
What did your line management responsibilities involve?
PRDS, so performance development of staff. Delegating responsibilities to the senior operations managers. Sharing an on-call rota with those senior operations managers. And allocating tasks, day-to-day tasks or project work to those senior operations managers.
And when you say delegation of responsibilities to the senior operations managers, who decided which responsibilities should be delegated and to whom? Was that just you?
I did, but in discussion with the senior operations managers, and identified the strengths to who were best to do those particular tasks.
In general, did you ever discuss delegation and what should be delegated and to whom with the person who was your line manager?
I don't recall exactly, but I'm sure I did. Certainly with Mr. George, I will talk about who would be best placed to do training, for example.
Now, I want to look at the control room and particularly other people who may have had some involvement with the control room during that period. First, is it right, summarising your evidence, that you reported directly to Assistant Commissioner Dave Brown between May 2009 and May 2012?
Yes, that's correct.
And then May 2012, AC Brown was promoted to third officer, from which point on, you, I think, then reported to Assistant Commissioner Chandler, Richard Chandler. Yes?
That's correct.
And it was he who then reported up to AC Brown. Yes?
That's correct.
Yeah. AC Brown says in his first witness statement at paragraph 7, we don't need to turn it up, but for reference purposes, it is LFB 3032166, page 3. He says that AC Chandler took overall responsibility for control and mobilising between May 2012 and October 2013. That's what he says. Does that accord with your recollection, do you think?
No, for me, he was in charge of control from May, when he joined in May 2012 until he left in October 14, I believe. But he did have a period of sickness over that time, which may have why AC Brown put that information down.
Right, I see. And I think, in fact, AC Chandler was absent between late 2012 and April 2013.
Okay.
During that period, late 2012 and April 2013, while AC Chandler was off, to whom did you report during that period?
AC Brown.
Right. And after AC Chandler left, you then, I think, again reported to AC Brown.
That's correct.
Right. And then from April 2016, when AC Tom George was appointed as head of operational response, I think you reported to him and he reported to AC Brown.
That's correct.
Right. What processes were in place to ensure that your direct line manager, from time to time, was fully informed of any problems arising in control or relating to control?
So we'd normally have a fortnightly meeting. Certainly AC Chandler and Mr. George would spend time in the control room, so would be aware of any issues that were arising, because they would go and speak to other members of staff in the control room. But if there were issues or they'd had issues, they would raise it at those 2 weekly meetings.
You say AC Chandler and Mr. George would spend time in the control room. How often would they spend time in the control room?
When they first joined, it was more frequent, but as time went on, it sort of maybe once a week, once a fortnight.
And how long did they spend in the control room?
A few hours.
A few hours?
Yeah.
And were they during the day shift or the night shift? Or
Day shift, generally.
Right. And where did they sit in the control room?
They had an office within Merton, so they weren't actually in the control room, but they would go in and speak to staff in the control room during that period.
Was there any time when they would habitually observe the control room in action?
Not to my knowledge.
What was AC Chandler's role in relation to the control room between May 2012 and October 2013, or the date you say he left the LFB?
He was the head of mobilising and control.
And how much day-to-day involvement did he have in the management of the control room?
As I said, when he first started there, he probably spent more time in the control room. He led on a project to change resource management into control. So project-wise, he probably put a lot of effort in. Actually, day-to-day, some.
And would you consult with him on problems which arose in
Yes,
the control
indeed.
room? You did. Are there any particular problems that you recall that stick in the mind today?
Staffing, possibly. When he was doing the project for resource management, they wanted to remove an assistant operations manager off the watches, which would have impact on staffing. So I discussed that with him in the fact that it would be an impact at the union meetings.
When AC George was appointed head of operational response in March 2016, do you remember how much day-to-day involvement he had in the overall management of the control room?
When he first arrived, quite a lot because of vision, and there was still a lot of issues with staff getting to grips with vision. But again, he had other tasks as well, so he would spend some time in the control and the rest of it in headquarters.
And would you consult with him on issues relating to control?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So certainly when he first went to control, he was in there more often than not, and we would discuss it there and then.
And did you have regular meetings with him? You said, I think, you had fortnightly meetings.
Yeah, it was fortnightly, but because if he was in the control room, then obviously I would be there anyway, so we would talk.
Right. And these fortnightly meetings you told us about with AC Chandler and AC George, they continued, did they, after AC George had been appointed to head of operational
They
response?
did.
And were they minuted?
They weren't.
Why's that?
They were catch-up meetings, I think. So I'd be over at headquarters, and he would put aside some time, and just talk about any issues that he from his side, and any issues from my side. But they weren't minuted as such. They weren't official meetings.
Right. And what was AC Brown's role in relation to the control room?
During the outside of Mr. George and Mr. Chandler's role, he would have been the same, be responsible for control room at that point.
You say outside George and Chandler's role?
Yeah, so I mean he was a director of operations, so control come under operations, so he would have been overall responsible.
Right. How much day-to-day involvement did he have in the management of the control room?
Not to my knowledge, not very much. Only when Mr. George and Mr. Chandler reported to him.
And do you know what the frequency of reporting or the form of reporting was from AC Chandler and AC George
I do
to
not.
AC Brown?
I do not.
You do not. Now, can we go to AC Brown's statement, please, at LFB 000844020, page 12, foot of page 12, paragraph 28. He says this: I held monthly management meetings with Scott Hayward during the periods that I was his direct line manager. See paragraph 28 of my statement dated 29th January 2019. Those meetings were not minuted and there were no agendas for the meetings. They would be dictated by key lines of current work and published Brigade Control specific key performance indicators, all of which were relevant to the successful operation of Brigade Control. And he goes on to say he would sometimes email you in advance of those meetings. Do you agree with him that you did have monthly management meetings when he was your direct line manager?
We'd diarise meetings. However, because of his role, sometimes they would be cancelled at short notice, or they would be cut short because he had other meetings to go to. But we did have meetings.
And it's right, is it, that they weren't minuted?
They weren't. That's correct. They weren't minuted.
Why was that?
I don't know.
How closely did you work with Assistant Commissioner Brown in relation to control issues outside those meetings?
Union meetings. If we were negotiating an issue with the unions, he would be more involved, and also project work for Vision. And discussing how Vision would work. He would be at those meetings too.
Now, he refers there to key performance indicators, as you can see. What were the control-specific or control room-specific key performance indicators?
To answer 95% of all 999 emergency calls in 92% of the time is the one I recall, which is the one we work to predominantly.
So 99%, because the transcript hasn't quite got that right. I think 99% of all 999...
92, sorry, it's 92%.
Right. Within...
7 seconds, I believe.
Any other key performance indicators?
Not that I can recall. I think there were one or two others, but that was the reportable KPI that I recall.
Right. And where were those used in the overall monitoring and quality assurance of the control room?
Yeah, I believe they were published at CMB, the management board meetings, and were made public.
I take it that there were no other key performance indicators in relation to any other aspect of the control room, is that?
That's correct.
So there was nothing in relation, for example, to training?
There was not.
Why was that?
I don't know.
Who was responsible for formulating or deciding what key performance indicators should be applied to control room?
I would say it would be between the AC in charge and myself.
Was there any discussion that you were involved in or you knew about what other key performance indicators should be formulated and applied to the control room, other than answering calls within a certain time?
No, it was not. It was not discussed.
The meetings that you had with AC Brown, were those an opportunity to inform him of any difficulties that the control were facing in any aspect of its operation?
Yes, it was not agendaed, so anything could be discussed.
And what, from your best of your recollection sitting there now, does anything stick in your mind about things you did discuss with him at those meetings?
Around that time, TUPE for staff, when we were looking at outsourcing. The new training contract with Babcock, whether control will be part of that, was a discussion.
Now, he goes on to say, sticking with the paragraph we've got in his statement, he says, my management style, this is about 4 lines down, my management style was to set targets and manage performance against those targets. This was a particularly useful approach with Scott because it encouraged him to be more proactive and better communicate with line managers in terms of progress against objectives. At the meetings, therefore, I would require Scott to report back to me with up-to-date statistics on the delivery of those targets. What kind of targets did Assistant Commissioner Brown set you in relation to control?
Except for the target of answering emergency calls, that's the only one I recall.
Right. And how was the performance of the control room managed against those targets?
We can monitor. Information management could provide us with a weekly or monthly statistic of those calls, how those calls are taken, and how fast.
So this was, am I right about this? This was simply a target relating to speed of answering calls.
Speed and the speed of taking the call and the call itself.
And the call itself. Those were quantitative analyses.
They were.
So no qualitative KPI.
No, there was none set.
Was any thought ever given to including a KPI about the performance of FSG calls and their handling?
Not during the time I was in tenure.
And that time, of course, includes, in fact, I think it exclusively includes the time after the Lacknell House fire. is there any reason that you can think of why there was no KPI applied to the handling of FSG calls, notwithstanding what had happened at Lakanal?
No, I can't.
Was there any discussion ever about whether there should be a KPI?
Not to my knowledge.
Right. Did you ever have to produce any written reports for AC Brown?
Yes, on occasion.
What kind of occasion?
I've done a written report for the Lakanal incident. I have, but I can't recall that time ago what I've done. But I have written reports from before.
Now, where he says, as I've shown you, this was a particularly useful approach with Scott because it encouraged him to be more proactive and better communicate with line managers in terms of progress against objectives. Did Assistant Commissioner Brown ever communicate to you that he was concerned in some way that you were not proactive enough?
No. I suppose the only, I think one of my PRDS was I didn't communicate with him enough, but then I was at Merton and he was in headquarters, and contacting AC Brown was sometimes difficult.
PRDS, just help me, performance review?
Sorry, performance review, yeah. So our performance, annual performance review. I can't remember the acronym.
Right, you can't remember it?
No.
No, all right. Did he ever tell you that you were not communicating well enough with your line managers about progress against objectives?
No, only he wanted me to talk to him more, but when I did try and talk to him, I couldn't get through.
If we go back a few pages in this statement of page 5, Assistant Commissioner Brown says this at paragraph 13. I'm so sorry, different statement. LFB 30032166, paragraph 13, page 5. LFB 000032166. And he says at paragraph 13, halfway down, I made an effort to be fully informed of any issues concerning control arising at the meetings I did not attend. I did this through my monthly one-to-one managerial meetings that I had with Scott, the LFB's appraisal system, and the monthly departmental management board meetings that Scott and the area deputy assistant commissioners, DACs, attended. What was the LFB's appraisal system that he's referring to there?
That would be the PRDS, but I can't recall what the acronym stands for.
What were the monthly departmental management board meetings?
So these were the Deputy Assistant Commissioner meetings. They were predominantly an operational meeting where Mr Brown would meet with his area DACs to discuss issues around what's happening in the brigade. Operationally, predominantly, it was predominantly an operation, but I was invited onto the board as control. I didn't have a great input into the meetings because I didn't really understand all of it. It was very much operational type stuff. Right, I see.
Is the expression departmental management board another name for principal management board?
No, it's a department with just the operation side of it. I think the principal is more all areas of the brigade.
Right. Was it another name for operational directorate management board?
No, that's a similar sort of attendance, but I think there was more departments in that.
Right.
In that, and headed by the commissioner, I believe.
Right. Now, these departmental management board meetings, which are not principal management board meetings or operational directorate management board meetings, but something else, did you attend them?
I did attend most of them, yeah.
You did. What was the purpose of those meetings?
As I said, they were to discuss. What's happening in brigade, predominantly operational, what's happening around the boroughs, any initiatives that are going on. They invited people to come and talk about fire safety or something similar, but they were just to get an update on what's happening around the areas.
Were they minuted?
Yes, they were.
They were. And what control issues were discussed at those meetings? Do you recall?
Predominantly around vision. We talked a lot about vision with the team. There wasn't a great deal to discuss with regards to control. If I'm totally honest, I don't remember discussing too much, but I did try and have an input when we were starting to move forward with vision.
Right. And how frequent were these meetings? He says monthly, is that correct?
I believe they were monthly, yeah.
So there should be a set of monthly minutes of these departmental management boards meetings.
I think there are.
Did you ever get to see the minutes after the meetings? Check that they were correct?
I don't recall, but I think I did.
Right. Have you seen any such minutes during the course of your preparations to give evidence?
No.
Moving on then to the day-to-day workings of control, is it right that the day-to-day staff in the control room consisted of operations managers, OMs, assistant operations managers or AOMs, and control room operators?
That's correct.
Or officers, CROs. And the OMs and AOMs, I'm sorry to use the acronym, but it's quicker, they manage the control room, don't they?
They do.
And the OM has overall responsibility for the watch on duty.
He is, or she is.
Yes. What did that involve, briefly?
So they would be responsible for incidents that are running at the time. They'll be responsible for allocation of work to the supervisors, the AOMs, allocation of training slots if there were any, and just being in charge and allocation during an incident.
You say responsible for the allocation of work to the supervisors, the AOMs.
That's correct.
I see. So this was as it were, staffing down.
Yes.
I follow. And the members of staff that we've just looked at, as OMs, AOMs, and CROs, they were all part of what you call a watch.
That's correct.
And there was one operations manager in a watch. Is that right?
That's correct.
And how many AOMs were in a typical watch?
4, I believe.
And how many control room operators were there in a typical watch?
Well, there was 16 in total, but we would staff down to, as a minimum of 11, I believe.
Did that 16 in total change between 2009 and 2019?
Yes, sorry, I was talking about the new shift pattern. So in 2009, there was 4 watches of 24 maximum on watch, those 4 watches. There was a shift change in 2011, which went to 16 per shift and 6 watches.
Why were they reduced in number from 24 to 16?
Because the fire control project, which was running from 2006 when I joined until its demise in 2010, were looking at different shift patterns. And they were looking at risk-based mobilising over the coiled spring effect, where you're waiting for something to happen. And they proposed this shift pattern. And when it went away, London Fire still wanted to pursue and make changes in the control room. So we pursued that shift pattern with a few variations, but I don't recall exactly what it was. But obviously it was a negotiation, and it was accepted by the unions.
You refer to risk-based mobilising over the coiled spring effect. It's not an expression I'm familiar with.
Okay, so risk-based mobilising. So when there was 24 in a room, so overnight, for example, when there were very few calls, a lot of people it was non-productive. There was nothing happening. So rather than have that many people in the room at that time, the busiest part of the day was sort of between 1400 in the afternoon and 2200 at night. So that's when people go home for their tea, for example, and start cooking and the like. And that's where we saw most of the incidents. So that's where we wanted to move the staff to have more staff at that point. That's risk-based.
Yes, I see. When the decision to reduce from 24 to 16 as part of a typical watch was made in 2011, was any consideration given to what might be called spate conditions?
Yes. Again, it was. I think there was a historical data was done over the previous 3 years. Over I think they worked off a 12-pump fire. How many 12-pump fires had taken place between 2300 and 0500 in the morning? And I think over that 3-year period there was 3. And I think one of those, and I don't recall exactly, but I think one of those was a recycling plant, so it was just a contain and let burn. And the other 2 required more attendances, but not overly. That was what the risk was based on, the fact that the risk had significantly dropped.
And was there a risk assessment a formal risk assessment conducted over the reduction from 24 to 16?
Not by me.
By anybody?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Following on from that, do you know whether the brigade ever gave any thought at the time they decided to reduce the watch from 24 to 16, what might happen if there were what were called multiple FSG calls?
No, not that I recall.
Now, if we go to your witness statement number 2, please, LFB 30866213, page 8. At paragraph 39 there, you say, I delegated responsibility for this training, and that's control room training, to SOM Lindsay Turner, 2009 to 2012, SOM or acting SOM Vic Bagnall, 2012 to 2015, and SOM Joanne Smith, 2015 to 2019. Did that same SOM have line management responsibilities for the operations support team, OST?
Yes, they did.
Yes. And what did that involve?
Performance and appraisal of those staff, allocation of work to those staff, welfare of those staff.
We've mentioned SOMs. Can you explain what the role of a senior operations manager or SOM was?
Yeah, so they were responsible again for, they deputised for me. They run their particular. So one of the SOMs would be responsible for the training or op support. The other one would be responsible for the on watch business. So it was a very similar in role to mine, but deputising and reported to me.
And is it right that SOM Turner was in charge of training, control room training, until 2012, and then deployed out of control completely?
That's correct.
Now I'm going to ask you about brigade control management meetings, which we've seen something of. What was the purpose of those meetings?
It was an opportunity for the OMs to discuss any issues in the control, but it also gave us the opportunity to update the watch management on any changes in the business.
Who attended those meetings?
Myself, the SOMs, and the 6 OMs.
How often did that group meet?
I believe it was monthly.
And who ran them?
I chaired initially, but then to give development opportunity to the OMs, I allowed them to chair. They used to rotate it.
Thank you. Now I want to examine training now and start with a little bit of background, if I may. Can we go, please, to your first witness statement, LFB 0005591, page 17. And let's look together, please, at paragraph 47 under the heading Training. You say there, in the first sentence, training is organised and delivered by the OST. And then if you go back, please, to page 7, paragraph 20, you explain who the OST is. And let's just look at that by reference to your statement. If you look under Action 9, you can see that 6 lines down you say this: the Operations Support Team, OST, are a group of assistant operations managers who carry out a number of training and system-related functions. They create and deliver all training documentation for control new entrants and provide training packages that can be delivered by on-watch staff. They develop familiarization and training packages for the updates to the mobilizing system and or changes to mobilizing attendances, as well as deliver that training. Did the members of the OST receive formal training for creating and delivering the training packages for staff?
They did, but not until 2017, I believe, or 2016. It could have been a bit late than that. But the existing trainers, some of them did, most didn't.
And in 2016 or maybe 17, who was it who delivered the training?
We asked Babcock to come in and do a trainers course for them, and they got a level 3.
Right. Are you sure that that was before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I'm not sure.
Or not? So before the Grenfell Tower fire, to be clear, the members of the OST didn't receive formal training for creating and delivering training packages to staff.
I think 1 or 2 of them may have,
Right.
those long-standing members, but certainly not in my tenure there did they attend courses that I was aware of.
Did anybody ever give any thought to instituting formal training for members of the OST so that they could create and deliver training packages for watchroom staff?
Well, I mean, they were delivering the training, and there was no, it was never raised that the training packages were, didn't provide what the staff needed.
Well, that may be because that nobody knew what to look for. So, but in short, is it a fact that the trainers were not trained to train?
That is a fact.
Yeah. Now, can we go, please, to page 17 of this statement and look at paragraph 49 again? You say there, in the first sentence, since January 2012, training has generally taken place at Merton, where there is a training room just off the main control room. Trainer-led training is carried out by the OST. Between 2009 and 2011, the OST comprised of 2 groups, the Brigade Controlled Training, or BCT, team, and the Technical Support Group, TSG. The BCT, which developed and delivered training, comprised of 1 operations manager and 3 assistant operations managers. The Technical Support Group, TSG, provided assistance with system changes and testing. And you can see what's said. Now, the BCT there was responsible, is this right, for creating training packages?
That's correct.
You go on to say, on page 18, in 2011, with the introduction of the new shift arrangements, the 2 groups merged into the new OST, comprising of 5 assistant operations managers. From 2011 to 2014, the OST contingent remained at 5 AOMs before reducing to 4 in April 2014. With the introduction of vision and the resulting training requirements in April 2014, the OST was increased to 6, although the formal establishment figure remains at 4. When in 2011 did that merger take place?
With the new shift pattern. So April 2011, I believe.
Right, I see. And after merger, did the OST continue to carry out training and system-related functions that the TSG had previously carried out?
Yes.
Now, at paragraph 50, you say, OST are led by one of the SOMs who have responsibility for the team and workload. From 2009 to 2012, this was Lindsay Turner. From 2012 to the end of 2014, it was Vic Bagnall. And from 2015 to date, it has been Joanne Smith. And as you say, I don't think we need to go there, but as you say at paragraph 38 of your second statement, you delegated, is this right? You delegated the management of training to your various SOMs over that decade, 2009 to 2019.
That's correct.
What did that delegation mean in practice?
I wasn't trained as a control officer, and the 3 SOMs who were had control background were better suited to organise and get that training delivered.
So they may have been better organised and trained to get it delivered, but did your delegation involve any retention on your part of any form of monitoring, supervision, quality assurance? Assessment?
I had oversight. So, and it was report by exception. If there was anything wrong or needed to be discussed, then, because I worked in the same building predominantly, then it could be discussed there and then.
Did you regularly monitor their work?
I wouldn't go in and stand over them, no. We would have regular conversations about any issues.
How did you know whether they were doing their job properly?
Because I had no negative feedback. So at the BCMM, for example, there'll be a training section on there. We'd ask the OMs if there's any training issues or what training issues are coming up, and nothing negative was brought up at those meetings to indicate that that work wasn't being done.
And how often did those meetings, the BCMM meetings?
I believe they were monthly.
Monthly meetings. And were they minuted?
They were.
Yeah. And would you regularly speak to the SOMs about controlled training?
Well, I'd speak about a number of things, but training would be part of that, yeah.
And was that frequent?
Certainly during the, from 2009 to 2012, because I attended the Lacanau boards, then significantly amount of discussion on training. It probably dropped off after that because, of course, we were moving on to other stuff and my focus was elsewhere.
Right.
And, of course, I'd expect the SOMs to report to me any issues.
Yes, and we'll come to that in
Yep.
detail in due course. What responsibilities did the SOMs or SOMs have in relation to training in general?
Identify what training was required, to liaise with the OST about what that training would comprise of, and ensure that training was delivered.
Did they have responsibility for signing off the training?
Yes.
They did. Did they have to consult you when signing off any of the training packages that were developed?
No, but then if they were going to deliver something, I would go in and observe and look at the training, and again during the Lacanau period, a lot of that did go on. There was a lot of discussion about the training, content of training.
You say you would go in and observe and look at the training, but you had no expertise in being a control room.
No, but I didn't have an expertise, but I could see, from a different perspective, what could be missing. The delivery of the training, for example.
Did you ever make any decisions yourself in relation to the control room training?
No.
No. Did you ever consult your own line manager, Brown or Chandler or George, from time to time about any decisions that you felt you might need to make in relation to control room training?
Only about outsourcing of training.
Not about content?
No.
Can we go to your second statement again, please, and look at paragraph 37 on page 7, LFB 30866213. You say in paragraph 37 there, in the second sentence, after I assumed head of service in 2016, I was accountable for ensuring that training was delivered. Prior to this, an assistant commissioner would have had responsibility for ensuring training was delivered. This would have sat with AC Chandler and thereafter AC Tom George prior to 2016. Are you saying here that before 2016 you didn't have any responsibility at all for ensuring that training was delivered?
I did have responsibility for
Right.
Yes, of course.
You say, yes, of course, it's not crystal clear from that paragraph, but that you've clarified that. But what about the period between May 2009 and May 2012, before Assistant Commissioner Chandler was appointed? Again, did you have any responsibility at all for ensuring training was delivered at that time?
Yes.
You did. And what about between October 2013 and March 2016, in the period between Chandler and George's appointment?
Yes.
Yes. Why do you say that it was only in 2016 that you were accountable, given that throughout that period you were line managing the SOMs responsible for the training?
Sorry, could you say that again, please?
Well, you see, you say in this paragraph, as I've shown you, you say, after I assumed head of service in 2016, I was accountable for ensuring that training was delivered. Why are you limiting yourself only to the period after you assumed head of service in 2016, given your acceptance that you had responsibility for ensuring training was delivered?
I had responsibility for training, but accountability would have sat with my line manager.
Oh, I see. So by the word accountable, you don't mean responsible. You mean ultimately responsible?
Yes.
I see. And who had ultimate responsibility for the decisions made about control room training? Was that the person occupying either AC Chandler or AC George or AC Brown's position?
In my opinion, yes.
In your opinion, but what about in fact?
Well, I'm responsible for, but I've got a manager above me who's accountable for control.
Right.
So I would say that they would be accountable for it.
Right. And how much day-to-day oversight did AC Brown have in relation to training?
Not a great deal to my knowledge.
What about AC Chandler?
He was in the control room more, and of course he didn't understand control as much, so he spent more time. But again, probably not a great deal.
And what about AC George?
Again, not a great deal.
So the people ultimately responsible for ensuring that training was appropriate and suitable didn't actually exercise very much oversight.
No.
So would I be right in understanding that in practical terms it was the senior operations managers who decided what training ought to be given and of what kind?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. And then they were responsible for delivering it through the OST, which was a group of operation managers and assistant operation managers.
It was assistant operation manager, sir, but yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Now, turning to the question of identification of training, in your first witness statement, if we can go back to that, please, LFB 000555191, page 17, paragraph 48, you say this: Control senior management reviews the training need for staff on an ongoing basis to identify new themes and ensure that OST creates training packages for these, i.e. GESIP, MTFA, and deliver these to all staff. Again, training on these packages is recorded by OST and uploaded onto STEP, S-T-E-P. Just help me, what's MTFA? Is it mobile terminal something?
Marauding terrorist firearm.
Right, I was wrong. Right, marauding terrorist firearms. And STEP, it's an expression we see and we'll come to later, but could you just tell us what that stands for?
Yeah, it's an automated system which allocates staff to training courses and records training.
Now, in the first part of the first sentence there, you refer to control senior management who review the training need for staff. Who are you referring to there?
The senior operations manager.
That's the SOM?
Yes.
Right. And did they identify the topics on which training they thought was needed?
Yes, through what was required operationally.
What do you...
So for example, MTFA, the marauding terrorist firearms, that would have been identified after the instance we had. So a training package would have been created and delivered to support that.
I see. So the topics were identified really as a part of a reactive process to events?
Yes. The only difference, I suppose, I know even GESIP, which is a Joint Emergency Services, which was a countrywide initiative, which was obviously fed down to brigades that we needed to train on.
Now you say on an ongoing basis, control senior management reviews the training need for staff on an ongoing basis. How regular were those reviews carried out?
Quite regular, because if it wasn't external training like the GESIP or MTFA, then internally there'd be changes to the mobilising system which required a tweak to how something's mobilised or delivered, or even the local London Fire Brigade may change attendance to an incident which would require a change to the system, which would require some sort of familiarisation or training.
Right, and were those reviews documented?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. Was it only the OST who developed training for control staff?
Yes. If we got a training package in, the training staff may have to change it to make it work for a delivery of our trainers to our staff.
Right.
So from the best of my knowledge, yes, we did, but we may have taken presentations from elsewhere and made our own package up.
When you say if we got a training package in, who would send it?
Well, for example, GESIP had a training package, I believe, and we would have had a presentation for that, but we may have changed it a bit to make it more for us, make it more local.
Right. Well, GESIP is, as you say, an example of a nationwide initiative.
Yes.
Which we know about, but a training package which came from within the brigade through the TCAP process, would you include that as something that you might have to change? when it got to the doors of the control room?
If it was to do with system changes, then yes.
Why would you have to do that?
Can you be more in what relation are you?
Well, I'm
talking?
just asking
Sorry.
you whether, when you say that there may have to be changes in training packages, whether you're including those training packages devised and developed by the brigade itself.
Well, we weren't involved in the bigger brigade training anyway, because we were, we did our own local training. We weren't part of the brigade-wide training, so no.
Do you remember whether any particular problems were picked up by OST in training, or the topics that were being suggested?
The time it would take to create them and deliver them would probably be one of those.
Right. Now, turning to that question of delivery, if we stay with this statement, please, and go to the next page, page 18, paragraph 52, you say there, due to the need to ensure the control is able to continue to carrying out its day-to-day functions, most training by necessity is delivered to staff who are on watch. This means that if there is a significant incident or a sudden increase in calls, the staff, including the OST, might be recalled to their positions in the control room to answer and handle 999 emergency calls. Now, was that always how training was arranged for control staff during that decade? 2009 to 2019.
The only time I've saw it differently is when we had not long after I joined, we had a major update to ProCAD, the mobilising system, where we took staff off the watch and trained them that way.
So yes, except for the ProCAD experience.
Yeah.
Why not arrange training for staff not on watch in order to avoid the risk of interruption of which you speak here?
Because the problem is with it is because we don't have spares to come in and cover those positions, so we don't have ridership. The number we've got is the number we've got. So to maintain service delivery, we felt the training would be better done on, or the training's been done on watch that way.
I mean, in a nutshell, does that just mean that you don't have enough people to cover a watch?
Well, I mean, the frequency of having to take staff off training to deal with an incident was not very often. So it didn't actually happen. Hence why it worked.
Right. But coming back to my question, why not arrange training for staff not on watch in order to avoid the risk of interruption? Is one answer, or the answer to that this was a resourcing issue? Well,
I mean, during that period, we were reduced on resourcing because, of course, we were going out to other projects, and I couldn't backfill those positions. But I'm not saying that we didn't have enough staff. We had enough staff to deliver a day-to-day service and deliver training.
Can you just help me understand how this worked in practice? You would have 16 people in for a...
Well, in 2009, there would have been a minimum of 16, yeah.
Right, so you've got 16 people present at the control room.
That's correct.
All potentially ready to answer calls.
Correct.
Would you take some of them off and leave some of them on the phone?
Yeah, we could take two or three or four off at a time if the room was quiet and still maintain the service. And the training room, both at Isle of Dogs and at Merton, were off to the side of the control room, so they were literally 5 feet away maybe, and that's how they would train.
Right, and then the watch would run for a period of how many hours?
10.5 hours before the watch change.
Right. So, and any idea roughly what a training session would take?
A couple of hours. Right. Depending on what the subject matter was. If it was a system update, it could be 20 minutes, half an hour, just to run through that. To something more like I don't know, MTFA. I'm not sure. A 2-hour presentation.
All right. And then at the end of the watch, they all go home.
No, they'll finish their watch.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Their watch, they go home. So the only alternative to training them in the way that you described, by taking them a small number off the watch, presumably in turn, is to have them in when they would otherwise be at home.
Yes. Well, you could bring them in. I mean, they do, external training does exist for staff, and when they do go out and do a leadership course, for example, they'll have time off before, time off after, and that time, so they'll probably lose an entire shift on that. And we could do that in ones or twos, but doing it for a whole, for a number of staff is very, very difficult to resource, because I don't have other people to bring in to cover those positions.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Yeah.
Now, we're talking about refresher training, obviously, not
Yes.
new entrance training. And we're talking about numbers of 16, or perhaps latterly towards 2017, 11, because there was a further reduction, wasn't there?
There was.
Yes. Just help me on that. Why was there a further reduction from 16 to 11?
It was still 16, but we use an abstraction rate in the room. So we take into account sickness, holidays, and just general absence. So whilst our session will be 16, our actual abstraction will be 11 people as a minimum in the room.
And question is, why not just pay your staff overtime to make sure that they were properly trained off the watch without interruption?
Because I can't make people come in on overtime, for one. We used overtime excessively to maintain our watches, because we'd obviously allocated staff to other roles, and of course between 2012 and 13, 2011 and 12, we were being outsourced, so I couldn't recruit against that. So I was always had less staff than I needed, than I could have.
Right. In relation to the scale of this problem, though, and we'll come to this in detail later on in your evidence, but the refresher training was only annual, wasn't it?
That's correct.
It was only supposed to be annual.
Yes.
And therefore, if you're taking people, if you're training no more than 16 people, it's not particularly resource intensive, is it, to train them off the watch? 16 people once a year.
At that time, it was, yes. And it wasn't just that training, which is important in itself. It was the other training and what was going on at that time, and the priorities. The priority was vision training at that time.
That was 2015, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but it started in 2012, 2013.
We'll come back to this topic in due course when we look at some contemporaneous documents. But if we look at paragraph 54, please, in this statement on the next page, page 19, you can see that at line 4 there, at paragraph 54, you say, the watch supervisor nominates a proportion of staff on the watch to attend the sessions depending on the workload within the control room at the time and the number of staff available on each shift, again taking into account sickness and other leave. Those allocated staff are then taken out of the control room and moved into the training room next door. So do we understand from that the training room where all the control training took place was immediately next to the control room?
That's correct.
Off it. Was that so that the control staff could swiftly return to their duties if the need arose?
That wasn't the primary. It was just the fact that it was next to the control room, because there was additional pods there that they could set the system up with.
Right.
But it was just the nature of it is they could walk back into the control room.
And what would happen to the training which was interrupted in the event that control staff did have to be recalled to their duties?
It would be held at that point and then resumed either after or at another time.
Did that happen frequently?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And would it be finished at some point later?
It would be finished, yes.
Right. And how would that be arranged?
The OST would rearrange with those staff that didn't finish to redo it.
Would the training be recorded?
It should be recorded, yes.
How would it be recorded?
On a manual spreadsheet.
And were there any problems with staff not being able to complete the training due to them having to return to the control room?
Were there any problems?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge.
And were there any instances of incomplete training sessions because of an interruption?
Not to my knowledge.
But it's right, I think, that the training sessions held in the way they were, with the on-watch staff in the room next to the control room, were always at risk of imminent interruption and non-completion.
Yes, that's true. That's true, yeah.
Can I ask you then about monitoring of training? Did you monitor the training to make sure that the training being given by the OST was actually happening?
No, but I would expect my SOM training to report to me by exception if it wasn't.
Right. Why didn't you monitor to make sure positively that the training being delivered by the OST was actually happening?
Because I didn't want to micromanage staff. I wasn't in control all the time. I had a number of competing projects and things that needed to be done. I couldn't spread myself that thinly. Hence why I had 2 senior operations managers to be able to do that.
And did you monitor to ensure whether the training that was being delivered was achieving what it was supposed to?
Yeah, and again, feedback from brigade control management meetings and feedback from SOMs would have given me an indication if that wasn't the case.
So you say, I think you described it as negative. Does this tell us that your approach to monitoring the training, both in terms of actually being delivered and in terms of its quality, what was to rely on instances of negative feedback from the SOMs, and if they didn't feedback negatively, you assumed that everything was running smoothly?
No, because at the BCMM, if there was an issue with training, there was a line for training. If there was any issues with training, if staff weren't happy with the quality of training, it would have been raised at the Brigade Control Management meeting. If at my SOM meetings or my SOM discussions there was any concerns with training, they would have been raised there. To my knowledge, there was none.
Yes. I mean, to put my question in a slightly different way, is it right that you regarded your monitoring role as one of waiting to hear negative things from SOMs, and if they didn't feedback negatively, you assumed that everything was running smoothly?
Well, perhaps negative wasn't a report by exception.
Exception.
Yeah. So if there was a problem with training or training wasn't being delivered, I would have expected to be told.
Yes, but you never took it on yourself to make any spot checks, surprise checks, to see that the training was being carried out and that it was being carried out to
the training
required objective.
The training room was opposite my office that walked straight into the control room, so I would walk through that door and see training taking place. So I knew training was taking place.
Yes, you knew it was taking place, but you didn't know whether it was taking place and had been completed, and you weren't able to monitor its quality. Is that right?
I didn't look into it in that detail, no.
Now, I'd like to ask you about 2 processes that were in place during your time as POM, which may have given some indication as to performance of the control room. And those 2 processes are call coach. Remember something called call coach?
I do.
And FSG review.
Yes.
Yes. I just want to show you first on call coach what SOM Smith, Joanne Smith, says about this in her witness statement. Can we go to LFB 001 21219, page 7, paragraph 17? And she says this under the heading Call Coach 2010 to 2012. One technical function that I was responsible for delivering during this period was Call Coach. When I was head of the technical team from 2010 to 2012, Control was using the ProCAD mobilizing system, and I was responsible for procuring a new quality assurance system in 2010, which was Call Coach. We used this program to monitor and review LFB's call handling standard. I exhibit a note which sets out in detail this process, that's JS2. Supervisors have a responsibility for 3 or 4 CROs, and so they listened to 3 calls a month for each of these individuals and graded them against the control call handling standards, which he exhibits as JS3. CROs received a monthly appraisal of their call handling techniques from their supervisors on this basis. Supervisors and or line managers would then identify additional learning or training points for CROs through this process. Now, I've read you quite a bit of that, Mr. Hayward. Were you aware, first, of Call Coach?
Yes, I was.
You were. Do you know why it was introduced?
It was something to assess the call handling of control staff.
And do you know when it was introduced?
I think we purchased it around 2009, but it wasn't introduced until about 2011 because there were some issues with the union.
Are you able to say how often FSG calls were included in call coach reviews?
It was a random dip. So because it was a standalone system, OST would need to lift calls out, and we couldn't identify what those calls were, so they were randomly lifted and given to AOM. So no, I can't. But what I can say is, if they're, we would listen to FSG calls and any call of if there was any issues, and take it out of that call coach process.
Yes,
and deal with it that way.
Were you involved in monitoring the results?
For call coach,
Yes.
yeah, we'd see some of the feedback from AOMs of what staff had done.
And did you discuss those results or that feedback with the SOMs?
With Joe, yeah.
With Joe Smith?
Yeah, Joe Smith.
And do you know, or can you remember how often those reviews were carried out?
I can't. It wasn't regular, but it did occur.
Right. Were any written reports provided to you?
No, because they come on a sheet. So the call handling standard was a tick sheet, if I remember rightly, and then there would be comments on those tick sheets. Whether they were kept, if there was nothing to report, then I wouldn't have thought they were kept. But I imagine they'd be kept on the watch.
Right. And did you report the results to your seniors, AC Chandler, AC Brown, AC George?
Not that I recall.
Let's go to LFB 00109-082. This is a draft of an audit of quality management systems prepared by station manager Steve Kelly. I think also went by the sobriquet of Ned Kelly, didn't he?
He did indeed.
Yes. Dated the 3rd of August 2010, which was an audit of the Brigade Control Training Department and specifically FSG, wasn't it?
Yes.
You remember this document?
I do.
You do. And now this draft, the one we're looking at on the screen, is one which carries SOM Smith's comments, which she inserted on the 11th of August 2010, so a week or so after the date that you can see on the screen. Can we go to page 9 in this document? Paragraph 67 there, under the heading Quality Management and Assurance, that you can see just at the top of your screen. Paragraph 67 says this: control officers and team leaders are subject to a monthly review by line managers using the call coach system. A confidential assessment of performance is conducted against set criteria on a one-to-one basis using the imported audio files to support discussion and feedback. This provides for a very effective workplace assessment of staff. Now, there's a comment you can see in the comments box on the right of the screen by Joanne Smith, which she has inserted, and that says, not according to our data and the opinions of our OM. You see that?
Yes.
Were you aware of SOM Smith's poor opinion of Call Coach at the time?
Yes.
You were. She brought that to your attention, did she?
She did, yeah.
What did she say?
Well, she said that it was a clunky system because it was standalone, and the way it was picked, it was just very, very, very clunky trying to get staff to, trying to get it to staff so staff could do a good job of doing an assessment of the call. So it was more about, it was the fact that the system was put in, transferring those calls over to the AOMs to listen with their CROs. It was just a clunky system. But as time went on, it did get better, or not get. It didn't get better, but staff worked around it.
Right. So would it follow from what you've just said that Call Coach was considered, certainly by SOM Smith at least, not to be an effective way of identifying new training or learning points for control room officers?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's an unfair assessment. But it did say. But what it did do, it highlighted some callers' processes when answering a call. So their greeting and what they're looking for. So it did help, I think, some control officers. On the whole, though, it wasn't considered a great system.
When you say callers, I think you mean call handlers.
Call handlers, sorry, yes, of course.
And did you think at the time of looking at adopting a different method for assessing call handling?
No, because we'd not long purchased this. It took us nearly 2 years to get it into the system, going through the unions. So we wanted to give it a go after the money was spent on it to use it.
Right.
And it did what it said on the tin. It was able to break down calls for them. It was just the way it was done.
So you stuck with it?
Yeah, because at that time, I mean, I don't know what, but we were looking at new systems after that anyway. We should have bought a new process along anyway. So there was nothing else to. That was the only system we had.
Well, that may be the only electronic system, but did you think about adopting a different method? Perhaps using human beings to assess call handling?
Well, human beings were used because, of course, you listen to the call and it's discussed with the AOM and the CRO. So this was just a way of breaking down that call into chunks.
Now, can we go to your first witness statement again, please, at page 39, and look at paragraphs 96 and 97? And I summarise, I think, there, but in summary, you say that in November 2015, Call Coach was replaced with a system called NICE, N-I-C-E, and that discussions about using NICE were still ongoing in 2019, which was the time you wrote your statement, and Control was not conducting random reviews of calls. Have I summarised your evidence, I think?
Yes, I believe that was the case.
Yes, NICE. What does NICE stand for?
I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Is it right that no reviews of calls were taking place from at least November 2015?
Yes, correct.
Right. Were you aware of that at the time?
Yes.
Did you not do anything to try to rectify that?
Not in 2015.
Why is that?
Because I had so much dealing with vision, I didn't have the opportunity to look at anything else at that point.
Did you see the value in regularly assessing calls through Call Coach, clunky though it may have been as a system?
We couldn't use Call Coach with the new system. It was a standalone system, and you couldn't interface it with vision, so it became obsolete.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm coming to a slightly different topic.
All right.
Still on the main topic itself.
But is that a convenient point?
It's a
from your
convenient moment.
perspective?
Yes.
All right.
That's right.
Well, it's a little earlier to take a break than we
It is.
might normally, but as you know, we have a break every morning, and we'll take it now. We'll come back, please, at 11:30.
Okay, sir.
And I have to ask you, please, not to talk about your evidence or
Of
anything
course.
relating to anyone else.
Okay, sir,
At
thank
the
you.
break. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you go with the usher then, please? Thank you. 11:30, please. Okay. Would you ask Mr. Hayward to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Hayward, ready to carry on?
I am indeed. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, we looked at call coach. Now we want to look, please, with you at the FSG review conducted by SOM Smith. Can I ask you, please, to look at her witness statement at LFB 00121219, page 8. And she says this at paragraph 18, under the heading Review of FSG Calls. She says, in addition to my role before I was seconded to the CFOA, I reviewed all FSG calls. After the Lacknell House fire, I recall I asked the TSG to collate every FSG call and high-rise call which was entered onto the system. I listened to all these calls to ensure that the correct advice was given in accordance with PN 539 and our general call standard was achieved, exhibited above at JS3. This FSG call review process was not a formal requirement following the fire at Lacknell House, but it was one I undertook of my own initiative, having informed the POM, Scott Hayward, of this. And then she goes on, any FSG calls, stroke high-rise calls that were dealt with well by CROs may have generated such positive feedback to the call handler, and I exhibit an example of such feedback at JS4. First, do you agree that you discussed the commencement of that FSG review with SOM Smith, as she says?
Yes.
Can you remember why she decided to undertake that review?
I don't recall exactly why. I think FSG calls were, they were an important call, and it was right that we should listen to all the calls. And she come and said that she would do it. I don't recall the exact reason why. Post Lacknell and the types of calls that were made, and the fact we'd introduced some changes to the training, it was just to make sure that training had taken hold. Right.
Do you remember whether she was the only one to undertake that review?
She listened to all the FSG calls, but we all did. I know that Mr. Crinion did, and because it was all in the same office, we'd listen to it all at the same time. But it was predominantly Miss Stibbards that did it, or Smith.
Stibbards is her mate.
Yes,
isn't it?
Correct.
Was the review that she carried out using call coach?
I don't recall. No, I don't believe it was. I believe she just listened to the calls.
Right. Do you know why it wasn't simply subsumed into the regular call coach assessments that all supervisors were asked to undertake?
Because the fact that she was listening to all FSG calls anyway, and the fact is they were randomised. We couldn't choose. The system wasn't intelligent enough to choose a particular call from the system to drop into call coach.
I see. What oversight did you have of that review?
She would talk to me about those calls, and we would listen to calls that didn't have anything or added something in that call, and we'd ensure that the OM in charge of the watch was told so they could speak to their CRO about it.
Were her findings as a result of this review recorded anywhere?
Not that I recall.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Don't know. Did that review continue when, or rather once, SOM Smith was seconded to the COFA in 2012?
It was some Diamond and some Bagnall at that point, I believe, when she went to see FOA, and FSG calls were listened to, yes.
So did they continue the review process?
That they would listen to all FSG calls that come in.
Right. And that review, was that a review looking back at all of those historically, or a review on a call-by-call basis?
Call-by-call basis.
I see. So how would this work? There'd be an incident at which there'd be an FSG call, or maybe more than one FSG call. At what point would the call be reviewed by either SOM Smith or SOM Diamond or Bagnall?
If the call was downloaded, it could be listened to the following day, that afternoon. There was no specific time frame given to when that call should be listened to.
Right.
But it would have been listened to. Any issues identified would be fed back to the OM of the watch, where the call taker who made the call,
Right.
and any action taken, going through that call, maybe through call coach before we lost its capability, and to go through that call and break it down and see what was missing.
Right. And when did you lose call coach's capability?
When Vision come in, so
To 2015.
2015, yeah.
And was there any record of the issue being identified and then fed back to the OM of the watch and taken further?
Not that I'm aware of. It was done locally.
Was there a system in place whereby the problem identified from a particular call by that review process was set up for training so that it could be trained?
Not that I'm aware of, but then these were omissions of, potentially omissions of a question being asked. For example, it was already in the training; it was just omitted by the call taker.
Was there a system in place whereby these calls were reviewed and trends identified so that trends could be reversed through training?
Not that I'm aware. Not that I'm aware of.
Why is that?
Because each call is different, so it's not scripted like a they are free to ask. They are given guidance on what sort of questions to ask. So each call could be different, and every call taker would say something slightly differently. So I don't recall there ever being trends of saying or not saying something.
Now, if you go to paragraph 19. SOM Smith says this, Joanne Smith says this: I do not know if this review of all FSG high-rise calls continued when I was seconded to CFOA in 2012, but when I returned in 2015, I once again requested and reviewed all FSG calls. It was no longer possible to monitor all high-rise calls due to the volume of calls the LFB now receives in relation to high-rise incidents. Now, did those reviews in fact continue after SOM Smith left for the CFOA and then came back?
I'm not quite sure I understand the paragraph. It was no longer possible to monitor all the high-rise calls due to the volume of calls the LFB now receives in relation to high-rise incidents. So we're talking about FSG calls, not calls to high-rise incidents, which don't always generate FSG. So I'm not quite sure the question.
Well, let's break it down. First, when Som Smith returned from the CFOA, which was in January 2015.
Yes.
Did she discuss with you continuing her FSG reviews that she had been doing before she left in September 2012?
Not that I recall, but she could well have done.
Right. She says, as you can see, that she requested and reviewed all FSG calls. Do I take it that if she did that, she didn't raise that with you?
No, she would have just gone and got the calls again.
Did she raise with you, do you remember, any concern that her reviews hadn't continued in her absence?
No.
Did she discuss with you what discussions she had had with Som Diamond or Som Bagnall about their reviews in her absence?
No, not that I recall.
You mention, or you pick up on the fact that she identifies both FSG and high-rise calls almost as one and the same. Was that, to your knowledge, the subject of her FSG calls? In other words, she was looking at FSG calls only from high-rises, or all FSG calls and all high-rise calls?
I believe she's looking at all FSG calls, regardless of whether it was high-rise or not.
Can you tell me from your own knowledge what the relevance of high-rise is in a FSG review?
Well, because we deal with a high-rise incident differently than we do to other buildings, because of course we have a stay put.
Now, can I ask you about how control training was planned? Different topic. Can we go, please, to your second witness statement, LFB 000086213, page 7, and let's look together at paragraph 37. You say there that the OST was responsible for establishing and maintaining the recurring training plan as directed by the SOM. Who in OST did you expect to establish and maintain the recurring training plan?
There are 4 standing AOM assistant operations managers in OST, and the expectation is those 4 that would maintain maintaining the reoccurring training plan.
Right. Was that plan ever recorded in a formal written document?
Not that I recall.
Again, why is that? Do you know?
No, it hadn't been done in the past, so it just hadn't been considered.
So how did the AOMs know what the recurring training plan at any time being maintained was if they didn't have a document to refer?
Because the SOMs had meetings with them and would tell them.
So it was kept in people's heads, was it?
I believe it was recorded on a training planner. I know at one point it was put on a smart board behind them.
Well, that would establish what? Dates?
Dates of what training would be, yeah.
Right. But it wouldn't establish or wouldn't identify what the content of that training plan was to be or the desired outcomes, would it?
No, the type of training and what was being trained would be recorded.
Right. Did AC Brown ever ask you to produce a recurring training plan?
Not to my knowledge.
What about AC Chandler or AC George?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you ever discuss the recurring training plan with the relevant SOM, whether it was Joe Smith or whether it was Soms, Diamond or Bagnall?
Yeah, after the Lacanau outcomes reports, we talked about reoccurring training.
You say after the Lacanau outcomes report, is that the Lacanau control report of November 2012?
Yes.
Right. Did you monitor the creation and development of those recurring training plans yourself?
Yes, to start with, yes.
What did you do?
Well, because we agreed when that training was to take place and what the content of the training. So it was a biannual full day, and then the other year would be a CBT.
Oh, this is the process, was it?
Yes.
I think you're describing one of the actions, or some of the actions, comprising the 34 actions post-Lacanau but pre-inquest.
Yes.
Yes. And we'll come to those in detail.
Okay.
In your evidence later on. Was there any other formalised structure, or any formalised structure, under which the control room training needs were identified and managed?
The only training needs we did at the time was for the AOM supervisor course. The issue with the training of control staff was the fact that they do a CRO training course and then there was nothing else after it. So all the training was reactive predominantly, and it was done on a needs basis as opposed to a regular to start with.
And in your last answer, where you refer to a CRO training course, that's the new entrance training, is it?
Yes, new entrance training course. Yeah.
Do you agree that control should have a structured training plan in place?
Yes.
Can I just ask you to look, please, at INQ 30s14945? Now, this is the first page of a document called Fire Service Manual, Volume 1, Fire Service Technology, Equipment and Media, Communications and Mobilising, published by HM Fire Service Inspectorate. And the date of publication, although it's not on your screen, is 1998. Are you familiar with this document?
I'm aware of the document. I'm not familiar with it.
Right. Can I then show you something in it and see if this triggers a recollection? Can you please go to page 129? This is Appendix 1, which is headed Control Staff Training, Competence and Promotion. And at the very foot of the screen, in the left-hand column, you can see that it says this: through training of personnel, the Brigade will respond to the needs of those it serves by defining training needs and providing the most effective means of fulfilling those needs, thereby providing a quality service. Training for control personnel has always been hindered by the small numbers of staff available and the need to maintain cover in the control centre. Training is usually watch-related and carried out at the normal place of work. This ensures the maximum number of personnel available. For these reasons, Brigade should consider the provision of a training officer and/or watch training days away from control. Were you familiar with any of those statements or principles?
I was aware that in the past, staff did detach and go to the fire training school and do control training, certainly for managers, but it didn't exist when I arrived at control. I've seen this document when I was doing on the Lacanau investigation.
Yes.
So we did have a look at this document.
Well, exactly. I was going to ask you. This document, I think, is referred to extensively, and I think in part verbatim, in the Lacanau Control Report of November 2012. Isn't it?
But it wasn't used as part of the gap analysis.
That's a different exercise which happened in 2010, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and we'll come to that as well. But just in general terms, to your knowledge, were the principles that I've just read to you from this page of the manual from 1998 ever used as a benchmark or a standard for control room training after 2009? And
the only, as I say, the only time we detached staff to do training that I recall was when there was a major update to the ProCAD mobilising system, where we took staff away to go and train that. The rest of the time it was done on watch.
Right. Was there ever any discussion, to your knowledge, within the brigade about diluting or abandoning these principles during the period 2009, Lacanau, and
No,
2017?
Not that I
Grenfell?
recall.
Can we go then, please, to a different document, which is the 1993 Home Office Circular. This is at LFB 403617. I'll show you the first page of this document, which the inquiry has seen before in phase one. And it's a letter from the Home Office to the Chief Executive County Councils and the clerk to the Fire and Civil Defence Authority and the Chief Fire Officer. It's sometimes known as the Dear Chief Fire Officer letter, dated the 12th of October 1993. Dear Sir or Madam, Fire Service Circular 10/1993, Training of Fire Control Staff. And if you go to page 3 of this document and look at paragraph 11, in respect of watch refresher training, it says this: it is recommended that on-watch refresher training should be given to all fire control staff on a systematic basis, i.e. it should be both scheduled and monitored. The subject matter will depend on local circumstances, but emphasis should be given to little-used procedures or areas of weakness. It is recommended that brigade training officers should be encouraged to participate in the training to augment the efforts of fire control officers. Were you aware, first, of this letter?
Yes.
Were you aware of paragraph 11, as I've just read to you?
Yes.
Do you accept that document, indeed this document and the manual that I've read to you from 1998, made it clear that training for control room staff needed to be defined, planned and structured?
Yes.
And again, was there any discussion, to your knowledge, leaving aside the gap analysis detail we'll come to, about diluting or abandoning the standard set out in paragraph 11 of this letter?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Now, let's go back to the Ned Kelly audit, if I can call it that, of the 3rd of August 2010. LFB 00109092. And this time I want to show you a different draft of the one we were looking at before. This one carries comments from Assistant Commissioner Brown and SOM Turner, which were provided in August 2010. If we go to page 7, paragraphs 47 to 49 there, under Systems for Performance Management, do you see that?
Yep.
It says, under 47, it appears that adequate long-term planning of the regularly delivered elements of the BCT's curriculum is not being carried out. And there's a comment that I'll come back to. This may account for the fact that the delivery of fire survival continuation training to observed candidates fell outside the parameters of the recommendations found in the Emergency Call Handling Techniques and Fire Survival Guidance Training document, i.e. 12 monthly. However, Brigade Control Principal Management have stated that once the current tranche of fire survival training is completed, it is planned for all staff to receive a full course every 24 months, with 12 monthly interim training being delivered via a computer-based training solution. Notwithstanding the above, it is vitally important that adequate training planning systems are implemented for all courses, including appropriate training records that support the cyclical training planning process. Recommendations, paragraph 50, in bold, implement adequate training planning and recording systems. Now, first, do you recall that recommendation in the text of the draft?
Yes.
You do. Do you recall discussing it with Assistant Commissioner Brown?
No.
Do you remember discussing it with anybody?
Yes, I'd have discussed it with the SOM.
Is that Som Turner?
Tom Turner, yep.
Yes. And in the review comment corresponding with the recommendation, Som Turner says, and this is in the blue box, I think once we start using STEP, which is imminent, we will be doing this. You see that?
Yes.
And I asked you about STEP before. What was the relevance of STEP in this context?
Okay, so training is recorded and was recorded up to that point manually. So a spreadsheet within the training on the training drive. London Fire Brigade have got a system called STEP, and I'm not sure of what the acronym stands for, but it's an it's automated system. So it'll allocate a firefighter to a course. It will send them pre-course notes, tell them where they need to be, what time, and at the end of the course it'll send them a feedback form, and then 6 months later it'll send them a follow-up feedback. Because we weren't part of the LFB training setup, we didn't get any of that. So none of our training was recorded electronically brigade-wide. It was kept locally. So what happened is we asked that we be put onto that system so that we could better record our training. However, it relies on a system called STARS, which is our staff training, and I can't remember the acronym, I'm sorry, but it's about all the staff that are in on watches and that. It will take the name from STARS. We weren't set up for STARS because it's predominantly an operational piece of equipment, which we weren't on at that time. So all we could do at this point was to transfer our spreadsheet on a monthly basis to information management in headquarters, and they would upload that information onto STEP, and that's what we've done until around 2015, I believe.
Right. So, in fact, Som Turner was wrong that being put on STEP would not ensure adequate training and planning and recording, because it was reliant on the STARS system.
Yeah, but at the time when she wrote that, we expected to go on to STEP, but as it was, technologically wise, we couldn't do it.
I see. But you didn't know that at the time.
No.
Now, can we then go to LFB 000-58077? This is an email from the spring of the next year, 2011. And if you go to to page 2 in this email string, please, and look at the bottom email, you can see that you email Lindsay Turner at Som Turner. Yes?
Yes.
FSG refresher is the subject. Lindsay, can you let me know how we are training staff in FSG
well, I'm not
this
sure
year?
we're quite there yet, are we? Did you want page 2?
Yes, I do. Yes, page 2. It's come up. For some reason, it hasn't come
No,
up.
it hasn't come up. That's why I've interrupted you.
Yes, that's quite right. Okay, there it is. Yes,
That's
the
nice.
email
Thank you very much.
on the screen now. It's from you to Lindsay Turner, FSG refresher. Lindsay, can you let me know how we are training staff in FSG this year, please, and a timeline? You see that?
Yes.
Now, it looks as if, this is the 12th of May 2011, so this is some 7 or 8 months after the discussions in August the previous year. You were inquiring, is this right, for the first time in May 2011, what the FSG training was for that year?
Yeah, I believe this was reference to whether we were using a CBT package or we were going to have to use our own PowerPoint presentation because the CBT wasn't ready.
But my question was slightly different. Was this the first time, May 2011, that you asked what the FSG training was to be for that forthcoming year? Or within that year?
No, I think the reference is that I was asking whether it was a CBT package or because I was waiting to get feedback from LFB training about the CBT packages that were created to deliver the training in the intervening years of the full day. And in 2011, we were still having problems of them putting it together. So we would look like we'd have to use our existing PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, I see.
What I was asking there is how are we going to train the staff if we're not using the CBT?
Right. So implicit in your question is that there was a background to the CBT not yet having been delivered.
Yes.
I follow that. Does that explain why it is so long after the 3rd of August 2010 draft, or perhaps the mid-August comments on the draft, that you asked this question?
Well, we'd already trained the first tranche through because obviously training, because there's over 100 staff, the training rolls into the year, so we don't do it all in sort of a 4-week block. It rolls on. So I think I was asking at this point, we'd done the first one in 2010, and I was asking how we were going to do it this year for running 2011, 2012.
And is it right, looking at this email, that there was no training plan in place at that point, at least for FSG?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I mean, the email is if we were waiting for CBT, perhaps we were waiting for the timeline because of the CBT. If we were told that the CBT weren't going to be ready, we'd have to look at an alternative. But then I don't know whether there was a timeline at that point or not. I don't recall.
Given Station Manager Kelly's recommendation, at paragraph 50 of the draft that I showed you, the previous summer, August 2010, can you explain why there was still no training plan in place?
What, from this email?
Yes, at this time.
I don't know that there was a training plan in place or not because this email doesn't reference. I don't think it references that. From my understanding, it looks to me like I'm just asking what we're doing instead of.
Can we go to LFB 00113237? This is a Brigade Control Management meeting, or I think as you refer to it, a BCMM.
Yes.
This one is a minute of the meeting dated the 18th of July 2012
Yep.
at Merton. And we can see who was present. You see there?
Yes.
And Operations Manager Bagnall was in the chair. Did you always attend those meetings?
If I was available, yes.
And we can see that AC Chandler was there and SOM Stibbard
Yes.
was there, but you weren't, I don't think.
No, so I was obviously out on other business.
And given that you couldn't attend, would you have read the minutes afterwards?
Yes.
You did. And if you look at page 1, you can see that I think you were on leave at the time. It's page 8. Would that sound about right, given the time of the year?
It varied.
You can't see it from the screen.
No.
But can we take it that you would have caught up with what had transpired at this meeting?
I would say so, yes.
Now, if we go to page 7, at the bottom, let's look at item 5. We can see there's a heading, Training, AC Chandler. And it says, AC Chandler began by saying that he had attended a meeting recently which spoke about the training, commissioning and alteration process. He stated that in the document there was nothing showing that Control had carried out any form of training. He went on to say that he spoke to Control Training to see if there was anything in place to show what form of training had been received by staff. The AC asked if there was a training matrix which Control worked to. The response was no. AC Chandler asked the ops managers to see what training would be needed for their watch. All ops managers to present this information in the form of a spreadsheet so that he is able to see what Control's needs are for the year. AC Chandler will then speak to Nick to see what can be done. This information can be used by ops managers as guidance, and also at the end of the financial year for easy audit. OST have been tasked to produce a training matrix. AC Chandler went on to say that OST's line management situation would be addressed when POM Hayward was back from leave. The line management will now come under the remit of the SOMs. There will only be a single line of management. OM Vic Bagnall reminded us that training at that time had set up a system that all staff training was fed into, which would then be transferred into the authority's STEP system. AC Chandler said the recording of information was good, but it needed to show where control are heading. It was suggested that a bigger training team would be required to carry out this function, but the difficulty lies with releasing staff to attend training. Ops managers to pick this up at their next local level meeting. OM latterly Bagnall agreed to collate all training information together. Now, were you aware that AC Chandler was asking for all ops managers to present this information in the form of a spreadsheet so that he could see what control's needs were for the year?
I'm going to say I don't recall, but I would have done, yes.
Is it right, therefore, that there was no training plan in place at that point?
Not the way he's saying it, he's stating it there.
No.
Because the thing, oh yes, no, not the way it's stated there.
No. And can you explain why that was still the case, almost 2 years after Station Manager Ned Kelly's recommendation we've seen in paragraph 50 of the August audit?
I can't know.
Do you know? Did you know that OST had been tasked to create a training matrix?
Well, I don't recall, but if AC Chandler's asked them to do that, then yes, they would have done.
Do you know whether one was ever created?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Were you aware that AC Chandler had said that recording the information was needed to show where control was heading?
No, I don't recall that. I do know that we were feeding on to STEP, but as I explained previously, it was a manual setup.
Right. Did you yourself do anything to progress a training plan or matrix after you came back from leave?
I can't recall.
Right. And if we go to page 8 of the same document, or lower down, I've read to you that there's a reference to a bigger training team in that last paragraph, or penultimate paragraph in the box that I've read to you. Were you aware at the time of any difficulties with releasing staff for attending training?
Yes.
And what were those difficulties? Do you remember?
What date was this? Could you just remind me what date?
Yes, this is July 2012, 18th July 2012.
So July 2012, we've just taken over the Fire Rescue Service National Coordination Centre. So I detached a further 6 staff to be able to train on that, because we were getting ready for the Olympics in 2012. And also at this time we were being outsourced, so I couldn't recruit against it. So I was 11 staff down, and I had to provide the service.
Did you, at that stage, give any consideration to what I've read to you from the 1998 document, the Fire Service Manual Volume 1, and remember the words there about training for control personnel always being hindered by the small number of staff available, and therefore Brigade should consider the provision of a training officer or watch training days away from control? Did you consider that at that time?
Yes, but we as I explained, I couldn't spare any more staff at that point to be detached out of the control room, because I was already 11 staff down. I had the Olympics to deliver and the FRS NCC to deliver. Right. And of course the staff were, due to the outsourcing issue, although I think it had changed by then, but there was still the ramifications of the outsourcing, and I had no pipeline for training at that time.
Right. Did anybody do some kind of risk assessment of the implications to control of the circumstances you've just described to us, such as the outsourcing and the imminent Olympic Games?
Not that I recall.
No. Do you know or can remember whether OM Natalie Bagnall collated the training information, as this minute said she would?
I don't recall, but knowing OM Bagnall, I suspect she would have done.
And there are, just to be clear, there are two Bagnalls there.
Yes, this is Natalie Bagnall. So
Is that his wife?
it is indeed.
Right. Or partner.
Partly, yeah.
LFB 0004997. If we look at the next at an email chain of the 15th of August 2012, we can see there, it's on your screen, that the top email is from you to OM Natalie Bagnall, dated the 15th of August 2012, so about a month after the BCMM we've just seen, of the 18th of July. And in the second email down from the top of the chain, you can see that she sent a circular email to MER operations managers forwarding a training plan. And she says, following our management meeting last month, Richard asked for an annual training strategy. As we did not have a meeting this month to discuss this, I approached Richard in the first instance with an idea that I had. Taking into consideration that we cannot just book off status 7, we need to have a flexible training plan that fulfills Richard's expectations, as well as allowing us to manage training alongside our normal work. Please see my email below and let me know your thoughts. Obviously, it's in a very rough form at the moment, but I'm happy to produce a more detailed plan if you are all in agreement that this would be a good way to go forward. Richard clearly is Richard Chandler there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And she must be referring to the 18th of July 2012 BCMM when she refers to the meeting, yes?
Yes.
Did you know that AC Chandler had asked for an annual training strategy, as she refers to here?
I don't recall, but if it was on the BCMM, which I believe it was, then yes.
She goes on to say, as I've shown you, that, well, if you look at the email below that, you need to go to page 2 for this. It splits between pages 1 and 2, but what she's forwarding is her email to Richard Chandler. See that?
Yes.
Hi, Richard. And in the first paragraph, she says, following our meeting last month, you requested that the OMs produce a one-year training plan for control. At the time, I believe that it was also stated that we can't quite follow a rigid plan as we are unable to guarantee the availability of staff and training officers due to the fluctuations of our business. I have therefore been considering a plan that I would like to put forward to the other OMs. First, did you agree at the time that you couldn't follow a rigid plan because you were unable to guarantee the availability of staff and training officers due to the fluctuations of your business? Is that something you agree with?
At that particular time, yes, I agree.
Would it not have been possible at that time to have organised an annual training day where staff were not expected to be on shift?
No, because this is the same year that my staffing was I was 11 short in the control room. So to let out another 16 staff and rely on overtime to cover it was not viable at that time, in my opinion.
Did you look into it?
I don't recall, to be honest with you. It's always been an issue in control about, and like Miss Bagnall's put there, we just can't book ourselves off and go and do a training course. It's just not. We don't have spare staff.
Now, the email goes on to detail a plan that's been considered by OM Bagnall and then sent round for discussion, doesn't it? As you can see.
Yes.
And to summarise it, do you recall her proposal was that there could be a set period for FSG training to be completed, and then the rest of the year could require each CRO and AOM to complete a set number of training packages. Yes?
Yes.
And then the benefit of that type of plan was that she thought that the packages could be completed by one member of staff at a time, as a minimum, at any time of the day or night, and that training could be done during quiet times and less busy periods.
Do you mind scrolling down a bit? I've only got the first part of that.
Okay, yes.
There it is. Sorry,
it's
thank
an
you.
exhibit, so yes. If you... if you go to the penultimate paragraph on page 2, I was attempting to summarise it, but
Yes.
probably better just to look at that. But the thrust of it was that the benefit would be that you could have the plan or package completed by one member of staff at a time during the quiet periods. Yes?
Yes.
And that would be a defined strategy, but it would be flexible. That was the beauty of it.
Yes.
Now, you've added some comments to this, and if we go to the top email on page 1, bear with me because they're not immediately obvious. You say, good morning, Natalie. This is also 15th of August 2012. Good morning, Natalie. My comments below for consideration in your future planning regards Scott Hayward. Now, you need to scroll back down to the next email down that we've looked at before. Your comments are not immediately obvious from the email itself, but they appear to be written after the end of each paragraph. They're not in colour or bold. There's nothing that distinguishes your comments from her text. But if we look at page 2, in the third paragraph on page 2, you can see in that third paragraph that it says one of the supplementary reasons. Can you see?
Yes, I can.
One of the supplementary reasons for the introduction of the short shift was to provide, quotes, time for staff to train and develop. This has not been considered in your initial rough plan. This also provides AOMs and the OM, if required, to direct the training. Now, first of all, was that a comment that you made?
Yes, I believe it is.
Yes. Were you disagreeing with OM Bagnall about her plan?
No, it was just for further consideration. So the new shift pattern allowed a 4-hour window in the afternoon to train staff.
Why did you consider that using the training for the short shift was adequate when there were already problems releasing staff to attend training?
Because the on-watch training meant that staff were still on watch. The fact is the fact that I didn't have enough staff to release staff outside of that. So what I'm saying is that we provide 4 hours in the short shift, which is adequate to deliver training.
But it wasn't being used, was it? Or not at least adequately for
No.
AC Chandler's purposes?
No, but it was there available. Yes.
I think that's the point, though, isn't it? That even though the short shift meant that there was this extra time to train and develop staff, it wasn't being used, or at least not being used.
Not at that point, no.
Were Natalie Bagnall's ideas in this email taken further than this email discussion? Do you remember?
I don't recall, but I know that OM Bagnall did get involved in training more significantly.
Right, but you don't know what happened to her proposal?
I don't know.
Right. Can we then turn to LFB 00113402, please? This is the next BCMM meeting, and these are the minutes, 12th September 2012, and this time you are present, as you can see from the list on the first page there. And if we go to page 6, you can see section 5, which says AC Chandler update training. Ops managers discussed the issues of training for control but did not reach a conclusion on the matter. And just pausing there, why was AC Chandler providing an update in relation to training?
Because he'd not long joined and was heavily involved in the control.
Right. Do you know who briefed him?
I don't recall. Was
it you?
I would have discussed it with him, yeah.
Right. What were the issues for training that he refers to there? The issues of training for control, what were those?
I don't recall at that point.
He says did not reach a conclusion on the matter. What was that about?
Well, I think this is about the staff don't get the opportunity to go out and do training because there is no formal control training outside of control. But I think it was also other training, so not just control-specific training, but training in general, so non-controlled, like IT training or which are courses that are available to staff, but we were unable to release staff to go and do that sort of training.
Do we take it from that sentence that at this stage, September 2012, there was still no agreement on the training strategy or plan to be adopted by control?
I don't recall, but looking at that appears to be the case.
Why was that now more than 2 years after the Ned Kelly audit report?
I think the Ned Kelly audit report was specific to do with the FSG training element of which there was a plan. The other training outside of that was still being worked on. There were training packages, but they were developed a while ago and they needed updating. But of course, the training staff needed to update those packages. So I just don't think everything was ready to be able to deliver it.
But you're not saying, are you, that the FSG element was?
The FSG training was being delivered at that time.
So I'm trying to understand your evidence. Are you saying that the issues of training for control did not include FSG training?
Oh, no, I do. Yes, I do. It includes all training.
Continuing with point 1, it says this. AC Chandler pointed out that there is no robust defence if anything happens in control. He also went on to say training needs assessment for all staff to be built into their PRDS. And then, skipping over to, ops managers will be meeting in October, will discuss further training. Do you know what AC Chandler meant by there is no robust defence if anything happens in control?
I don't.
Do you remember what the discussion was about that?
I honestly don't.
On the face of it, it looks as if AC Chandler is recognising that control is exposed to criticism if anything went wrong during an incident.
Okay.
Does that way of reading what is recorded there, does that trigger a recollection of a discussion on that topic?
I'll be honest, it doesn't. It doesn't. I can't comment.
Can you comment this far? Can we take it that you at least were aware that at this point there were problems with getting control staff trained properly to such an extent that if there were a serious error in the control room during an incident, there was no good explanation that could be given for it?
I think training was going ahead in control, not as robust as it's saying there, but staff were being trained on the FRS NCC at this point, as well as FS3 training, which was going ahead. So I think this refers to training generally. So, and it's not all control focused training; it's all training.
Were you present for the further meeting in October 2012?
I'm not sure.
But the reason I ask is we don't have the minutes for that BCMM. If you don't remember,
I don't. If I was, I don't remember. So I would have attended all of them if I was there.
Do you know whether OM Natalie Bagnall had yet collated all the training material as suggested at the 18th of July 2012 meeting?
I don't.
We haven't seen it in the documents.
No, I don't recall.
Brigade. So do you know why she hadn't?
I don't.
Were you monitoring her doing that, or not?
Should have been. No, I don't recall. I don't recall.
Right. Who had oversight, as you might call it, over whether OM Natalie Bagnall did or didn't carry out the task that had been allocated to her at that meeting?
So at this time, I mean, she was reporting to AC Chandler. She was still an on-watch operations manager, so she'd have been doing this in her own time, you know, while she was on watch during the short shift when the... so she'd have been liaising with OST and the SOM in charge at that time.
Right. And this is September 2012, at which point SOM Smith is about to go off,
Yeah.
CFOA,
And SOM Bagnall would have been taking over.
right. So she would have Natalie Bagnall would have been reporting to Vic,
Yes,
her partner,
yes.
and he would have been reporting to you.
Potentially, yes.
So what did you do to make sure that he ensured that Natalie Bagnall collated all the training material as had been suggested at the 18th of July BCMM?
I don't know because we haven't got the minutes, the following minutes, but OM Bagnall was reporting to AC Chandler at the time, not to me by the look of it.
Why would that be?
Because this was in 2013, AC Chandler... Sorry, when was the date? Sorry.
This is September 2012.
So AC Chandler was only in the business since May that year. So he took a proactive role in control at that point and was just coming in and making changes, I suppose. I can't comment what he was doing, but he did have a lot more input at that early stage.
But the fact that he might be having a lot more input at that early stage didn't mean, did it, that you would have a lot less?
No, absolutely not. No, but I didn't necessarily get access to everything he did.
Why is that?
So I don't know. AC Chandler asked OM Bagnall directly for that information. Maybe she sent it directly to AC Chandler. I don't recall seeing it. I may well have done.
No. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the reporting lines here. I mean, is there any good reason why you wouldn't have seen it, given that SOM Bagnall was your immediate report, and that OM Bagnall was his immediate report on this topic?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Can we then go to LFB 00106146, please? This is an email from you to AC Brown on the 17th of January 2013. And you say, Dave, attached is the Lacanal action sheet with responses as directed. And that document is at LFB 00106147. And there it is. We'll look at it in detail in a moment. My first question is, do you remember whether AC Brown had asked you to send him that document?
Well, I don't remember him saying it, but if he says on the email, then obviously he did.
Do you remember what prompted that request?
No, and it might have been an update of the assurance. I don't know.
The assurance was dated November 2012, just to get the chronology right. Does that help you?
I don't recall.
Did you prepare this document that we can see on your screen?
It looks like my type of work, yes.
Because of the font?
Yep.
And the layout?
Yep.
Right. Do you have a recollection of preparing it?
No.
Okay. Did you prepare the task list, which you can see in the left-handmost column?
I didn't prepare because they were control actions, so I just copied the actions onto the table.
Now, this is the only version, I should tell you, of this action sheet that we've seen. Is it right that this was a one-off document?
Yes, I don't recall, but if that's the only one we can find.
Yes, we haven't seen any travelling drafts or any drafts with comments on them. That being the case, if we can assume that this was the only document created, do you know why it wasn't used to monitor the outstanding or ongoing actions moving forward?
I don't. I assume this was sent to Dave Brown for him to report at the CMB or a principal management meeting. But I can't be sure.
Let's look at one or two of the contents. If we go to the foot of page 1, over to the top of page 2, let's start with page 1. You can see on your screen, training matrix. And then under actions stroke issues, it says 2-year training matrix, including all control training, FSG refresher. And then in the third column, matrix being created by the OST. And then in the fourth column, under outcomes, it says senior managers with OST have revised systems for the release of staff for training delivery to be, and if we turn the page, implemented shortly. The 2-yearly matrix will form the backbone to this plan. Completion date, end of January 2013, but the plan will evolve as a living document projecting training for the future on a rolling basis. Now, is this right, that this was the resolution proposed in order to address Station Manager Ned Kelly's audit recommendation in August 2010, and in response to AC Chandler's request at the Brigade Control Management meeting in July 2012? Is that right?
I'll have to say yes. I don't recall, but yes.
It
makes sense, yeah.
Yes. Can you explain why that exercise was still outstanding as at January 2013?
I can't.
Was it completed by the end of January 13 as proposed?
I don't recall.
Was it ever completed?
I don't recall. I mean, we're moving into a realm of vision at this point, so things would have changed.
Right. I mean, we've not seen any evidence that the resolution proposed here in this last column was ever carried into effect.
Okay.
Can you explain, if that assumption is correct, why?
I can't explain why. I can only reiterate the fact that during January 13 and certainly up to 16, there was competing priorities.
Competing priorities.
Yeah. So OST changed into delivering vision, and obviously in 2014 we took on the resource management. So that's what changed.
Despite, by this time, the Lacanal control report and January 2013, the ongoing inquest.
Well, there was training planned in, but the training was CU training, which was a part of the Lacanal outcome. So training was planned in. Whether it was as robust, I don't recall.
Now let's look on in the year to May 2013. LFB 30s42081. This is an email you sent to SOM Vic Bagnall on the 9th of May 2013. Subject, training plan and database. Hi, Vic. During my regular meetings with Richard yesterday, we discussed the training issue and the fact that whilst the database is on the system and has a good layout, it is not dynamic and does not provide staff and management with a picture of the state of training for control staff for the next year to 18 months. And then, if you look at the very foot of the email, we need to scroll down, please, to the end. You can see, it says, or you say this, we can see an improvement to the database. Sorry, I'll start again. Can we see an improvement to the database by the end of next week, and then we will have periodic updates as the plans for all the training develops? Now, was that database, in effect, the training matrix that was being developed, or was it something else?
I don't recall, but I would suggest it would be the training matrix, or the outcome of what the training matrix should have been.
Or was it STEP?
No, because we still didn't have, at this point, we were still manually putting our training database onto STEP.
I see. Is it fair to say that at this point, May 2013, the proposal was not working as intended, not least because it wasn't projecting future training? But
training was planned. Training was planned in, as it states there. We had we started doing exercises with operational staff. So we're actually moving our training outside of control and supporting operational staff as well, and also exercises with our buddies, fallback buddies, to try and improve that as well. So training, it might not have been as robust as we planned, but training was being developed and it was looking better than it had been in the past.
Yeah, the training, but I'm maybe we're at cross purposes.
Well, the planning of the training then.
Well, in the first paragraph, you are telling Mr. or AC Chandler that the system, the database, doesn't provide staff and management with a picture of the state of training for control staff for the next year to 18 months. So my question is, why didn't it do that?
Because I don't think there was enough in it. So I think there wasn't enough of a plan over that period of time.
So it wasn't a problem with the database or the system, it was the problem that you hadn't populated it sufficiently.
I think that's probably the case.
Why was that?
I don't know. They were obviously working on it, but hadn't got that far down the line at that point.
Well, did you investigate?
I don't recall. I'd like to think so. The fact I've responded to this email.
Yes, and indeed you go on, and it's difficult to navigate it on the screen, but if you go on up, scroll up please, you actually give some consideration and suggestions to what to populate the database with, as you can see.
Yep.
So at this point, we're now at May 2013, can we take from this that even at this point, the database was not fully projecting future training?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Then let's move forward in time more than 3 years to July 2016. LFB 000-32826. This is a document produced as a report called a Root and Branch Review, I think, by Tom George,
yes.
AC Tom George, in July 2016. Just for your benefit, you'll recall there was in fact a later version of this, an update in February 2017.
Yes.
This is the 2016 version. Can we go to page 11, please, and look at paragraph 47? And at paragraph 47, it says this, and this is under the heading Development in Role. Paragraph 47, some staff feel that they are not adequately developed in role or receive development to progress to a higher role. The review has identified that maintenance of skills training is ad hoc, not planned in a robust manner, and often not recorded on an individual's training records, ITRs. Whilst there is a responsibility and onus on individuals to maintain their ITRs correctly by manually entering completed training, this is not often done, and staff are seldom instructed to do so by their managers. And then if you look at the recommendation under paragraph 49, if you turn to page 12 and look at C, at the top of the page it says this: each OM is to ensure that an appropriate, robust annual watch training plan is in place for their watch, agreed by their SOM and available to all watch members and managers. All training must be recorded on an individual's ITR, individual training record. The POMs/SOMs should work with colleagues from the Brigade's information management team to produce an IT solution to this, similar to training diaries used by station staff. Do you recall that finding and recommendation?
Yes.
Did you agree with them at the time?
Yes.
When you went through this review, as I think you say in your first statement, paragraph 88, that you did in July 2016, did you ask your team why there was no, quote, appropriate, robust annual watch training plan in place for the watch?
Because we didn't have access to the individual training records. It's via the LFB system. So if you were to go to the LFB system and look at one of our control officers on step, it'll have all training that's not at this time, that was not control. So those other courses that you can do, like wellbeing or mental health type training, that's recorded. All the other training, local training, we passed over monthly, although I believe at this time we did have a little bit more access to STEP, but it still wasn't robust enough. So when staff look at their ITRs, they see big gaps in training where it's not been lifted from the spreadsheet onto the electronic version of STEP. So the idea was to speak to information management and try and get us on the same footing as the station diary setup, so that all training could be done put in electronically, and that way there's less chance of the manual system falling by the wayside or people not recording training.
I see. So what's being described here, or what you've just described, is a mismatch. Is this right, between the LFB's general training, non-control, which is recorded in the STEP system, and the training delivered to control room staff, which isn't, or is only done on an ad hoc basis?
Yes. So all control-based training is different now, I believe, but certainly, and we just started using it around this time, I think. So all the control training, so everything was done in like vision training or MTFA training or the like, would be recorded on a manual database and uploaded onto STEP. That's how it would got onto the ITR.
But what's being said here, with which you agreed, is that there was no appropriate, robust annual watch training in place, agreed by the SOM and available to all watch members. Not that there was one, but it just wasn't on STEP. So, given that you've agreed with what's in this report, my question is, why was there no appropriate, robust annual watch training plan in place?
Well, 2015, 2016, all the training was vision-based training. So, as you're aware from my evidence, all of 2015 was focused purely on vision, and well into 2016. So again, priorities have changed, and I needed to get a working mobilising system so I could respond to everywhere in London, and that was the priority at the time. So all training was focused on that.
Right. I mean, is the reality, from what you've just told us this morning so far, that by July 2016, 6 years or so after SM Kelly's recommendation in August 2010, and over 3 years since the Lacanal Action document, training was still ad hoc and not being planned in an appropriate and robust manner?
I would agree to some of that. I still think that the competing issues that were going on over that period of time hindered that work. The fact that we were not part of LFB's training regime hindered that. We didn't have the technology to be able to have a more robust system in place, and we're relying on people to release people to do training rather than being directed to by emails and communications. So yes, to an extent, I agree. I think the impact of what was going on at that time had an effect on the outcome.
Can we look at the appendix to this report, please, at page 31? This is a summary of actions, as you can see. And if you look at item 49, you can see, this is 8 lines down, discuss with staff side representatives to implement enhancements to training and development as detailed in the report. And that action was assigned to JS, who was Joanne Smith, Alstibard's.
Yes.
And by that point, and this is July 16, you were her direct line manager, weren't you?
I was.
What steps did you take to ensure that an appropriate, robust watch training plan was put in place?
So at this point, we were liaising directly with training and development to enable us to develop proper development folders for control staff at all levels. So from a control to an AOM to OM, and right to the top. So I believe at this point, OM Natalie Bagnall was detached to learning and development to help facilitate that. And that was the process that and obviously Joanne was talking to the representatives about how we wanted to do that. and of course, and that was still in process when I left the brigade. But they had moved forward with it, and they were starting with a CRO training or CRO development.
Now, can we go please to LFB 000084097? Now, this takes us to July 2019, 13 months, well, in fact, 25 months after the fire and after the end of the evidence at phase 1 of this inquiry. This is a July 2019 briefing note compiled by AC Jonathan Smith entitled Control, Overview and Control Improvement Plan, and it was a brief for Tom George and Andy Rowe, as you can see.
Yep.
Did you read it at the time?
No, I'd left.
You'd left by then. Let's look at page 3, where he concludes this. And this is under management structure in the middle of your screen. The current position with 2 senior operations managers, SOM, does not provide LFB with the necessary resilience in order to ensure specialist managerial cover in the event of a significant or complex incident. When either of the SOMs are not available, cover is provided through the Deputy Assistant Commissioner Carder, the duty DAC. This was only intended to be a short-term solution and now requires resolution. And then underneath that is a proposal, and then underneath that, training, assurance and professional development. You'll need to scroll to the very foot of page 3. There it is. And it says the current provision of training, assurance and professional development requires a complete and systematic overhaul. Training is ad hoc and lacking in structure. There is no system for quality assurance, and the recording of training is inconsistent. Now, this is in 2019, after you had left. Are you able to explain why it was that training could be described, as it has been here, as ad hoc and lacking in structure, if the watch training plans were in use?
No, I can't, because I wasn't here then. But you know, even when Mr. George was in post, I asked again about. I mean, we've always been aware that training, OST, particularly over this period, were being used for everything, including training, which impacted on the overall training plans. And again, at that point, I asked that we outsource the training to an external provider alongside our LFB operational staff, which was turned down. But I did make it clear that we didn't have enough staff to train, and particularly, you know, this is obviously gone on after that, and I can't comment on what been said, but training was being developed, and a training plan was being developed in 2017, 2018, before I left.
I want to ask you next about the training records for control. And I'd like to start, if I can, please, with a document issued in September 1994. This is a LFB 000084054. And it's a policy, an LFB policy entitled Training, and the issue date is the 29th of September 1994. If you look at the foot of the page, please, and we can scroll down to the foot of your screen, you can see that the last amended date is the 28th of January 2009. So it was current at that point, despite the 1994 date on the top of the policy remaining. Can we go to page 3 in this document, please, where you can see that there is a heading, Continuation Training. The heading is, in fact, on the bottom of page 2. But let's look at paragraph 2.5, Watch Training Record. And it says this, a record of all training and instruction carried out is to be maintained by each watch manager. It is to clearly indicate the following. There are then 5 bullet points. The subject matter, the date the training was given, the names of personnel receiving the training, the name of the officer carrying out the training, any notes or comments relevant to the training. The record is to be maintained chronologically and is to be cross-referenced to a further record for each individual on the watch, clearly indicating the training/instruction he/she has received. The watch training record will be regularly inspected by the Principal Controller and/or the Deputy Principal Controller and/or Senior Controller training, and signed by them to the effect that its contents have been seen. And if we then scroll down to page 6 of this document, there's a later version of this policy number 164, which was reviewed as current on the 6th of May 2015. You see that? And if we go to page 8, again in the same equivalent section, continuation training, under the heading Training Records, 2.5, it says this: a record of all training and instruction carried out is to be maintained on the training database by each operations manager or an assistant operations manager, OST. This information is then entered by the strategy and performance team onto the STEP at the end of each month. And then at 2.6, the training database will be regularly inspected by the principal operations manager and/or the senior operations manager and/or assistant operations manager, OST. Now, first, were you aware of this policy when it was reissued?
I'm familiar with it.
You're familiar with it. Were you aware of it at the time? Familiar with it at the time?
Yes, I believe I was.
And that would include, would it, the specific provisions in respect of the training records?
Yes.
Yes. What steps did you take? Did you take any steps to ensure that these provisions were being followed?
Well, the fact the information was being sent to strategy and performance to put onto STEP.
Did you regularly inspect the training records?
I didn't, no.
Why is that?
Because the senior operations manager training would have done, or indeed the assistant operations manager.
So you left it to them to make sure, is this right? You left it to them to make sure that the training records were being properly carried out, or properly reflected the fact that training was properly being carried out and recorded?
I delegated it to them, yeah, on the fact that they would come back if there was any discrepancy. But we knew there was issues with STEP. I mean, I don't know about at this point, I don't recall now, but we knew there was issues with transferring information onto STEP.
So when you say you downloaded it to them, but to come back if there's a discrepancy, is that the same thing as exception reports?
Reporting by exception, yes.
In other words, is this right, that your method of delegating to the SOMs was essentially to leave it to them to make sure everything was running smoothly, to make sure that the training records properly recorded the training being carried out, but only report to you if there was a problem?
Not quite like that, no. There's only 3 senior managers in control to do a number of tasks in control. So, I can't do everything, so I need to delegate some work down to other people. And the exception reported is an accepted way of doing business. And
they didn't, is this right, didn't ever alert you to any problem with the carrying into effect of either paragraph of this part of this policy? Some Smith did raise issues with the database, but we already knew, and we were talking with strategy and performance and the training team and learning and development to try and address those issues. Now, you knew, I think, from the August 2010 audit done by SM Kelly that you needed to have training records that supported the cyclical training planning process, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. And as we've seen his recommendation at paragraph 50, there needed to be adequate training and planning recording systems, yes? The systems needed to be adequate. So you realised from August 2010, I would suggest to you, that there was a need for a proper system which adequately recorded the training, yes?
Yes.
Now, given that, let's look at LFB 000555208, which is the minutes of the Lacknell House board meeting held in June 2010. This is a couple of months before the Kelly reported that year. And we can see that you're present as one of the attendees of the Lacknell House board.
Yes.
And if you go to page 2, please, you can see item 8. you provide an update, control, Scott Hayward it says, that's you,
Yep.
control, and at page 3, item 8.8, if you just go to that, it says this: control staff training records will be aligned to STEP and individual training records updated and checked annually to ensure completion. The training audit authorised by the board has been carried out by SM Stephen Kelly from the Station Training Support and Performance Team. A report is expected by the end of June. Now, although this meeting predated his report, which in the event came in August, as the audit had been completed, were you already aware of the recommendation in respect of having adequate records of training?
Yes.
You were. And is it right that the action to address it was, as set out in this record, to bring control training in line with station training and use the STEP system?
Yes.
And was it expected, at least at the beginning, that the process would be automated so that would mirror what was happening with station training?
That's correct.
Yeah. And who was going to check the records annually to ensure completion?
I don't know. I hadn't got that far down to. I mean, the thing is, it'll be system, so you could do it on a database.
Well, maybe, but just looking at paragraph 8.8, you're telling the Lackland House board that the individual training records would be updated and checked annually to ensure completion.
Yeah.
Who did you have in mind who would carry out that check?
Some training, the OST team.
And how did you think they would go about that?
They could do it via the system. They could just highlight a person's name, and all their ITR would come down and tell them what training had been done in that year.
And at that stage, did you think that the STEP system would capture every single instance of training delivered to every single control room officer?
Yes.
And as you've told us this morning, there came a time when you knew that wasn't happening.
Yes.
When was that?
Well, I believe we got a partial access to STEP 2011, 2012, so that we could upload our manual records onto STEP. So we were still relying on a manual database, and then we could monthly update and send it to information management to put onto STEP.
Let's see if we can trace this through a bit more granularly. Can we go to LFB 0008432? This is a board meeting of the Lackland House board on the 8th of November 2010. We can see that you were present, as was Joanne Stibbards,
yep,
as SOM control. And if we go to page 1 at the foot of the page, we'll have to scroll down 4.6. You can see in the last line there. This is about refresher training. And in the last line it says, all training records have been transferred onto STEP. Were those the manual records?
Those were the legacy records. So there was obviously legacy records. So if you check on STEP, there's training records there from 1974. So I think the transfer was just to upload all the records that were available at that time. Right.
And if we then move on in time to January 2013, this is some years after, LFB 00106101. This is the email, slightly different email, but at the same day, 15th of January 2013, from you to Dave Brown, training audit summary report, detailed training audit summary as directed. And if we look at the document that you've attached, this is at LFB 00106102. There's the attached document, recommendation summary. Is this a document that sets out the progress made against Station Manager Kelly's audit recommendations?
I would, yes.
Do you know whether AC Brown had asked you for an update on the progress of those recommendations, or was it something you volunteered to him?
I don't recall.
And if we go to page 2 and look at paragraph 6, implement adequate training, planning and recording systems. That's paragraph 50 from the SM Kelly August 2010 audit we saw earlier this morning. And it says there, in the red text, there is a control-owned spreadsheet detailing trainer-led or external training courses for all staff. This database has been transferred onto the STEP database. However, it is still a requirement to manually update STEP as staff complete courses. We are still working with IT to enable our training to be automatically updated onto STEP when the course has been completed. Why was it still, at that stage, necessary to update STEP manually?
Because the cogs in London Fire Brigade turn quite slowly, and of course, it's not just STEP. It's STARS. It's all the the systems that work with STEP to operate it. So at this time, STARS didn't recognise control shift patterns, so you couldn't just add it to the system because it wouldn't work correctly. It's not quite as simple as just adding a database and switching something on. It required recoding, needed to speak to the owners of STEP, the owners of STARS, to try and make changes to the system, recode it to make it work for our shift patterns and for our staff. So it's not just us walking in and giving it in. It needs planning and access and recoding.
But you say the cogs in London Fire Brigade move quite slowly. Some might think that was an understatement, given the 2 dates in front of us. We know that at the Lakenhall House Board meeting on the 8th of November, all the training records had been transferred onto STEP. Here we are more than 2 years later, and anything that comes along now has to be manually updated. Why was it so long? Why did it take quite that long?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that question. I as I said, it wasn't within my remit, or I couldn't influence any more than what I could do there.
What did the manual process actually involve?
Taking a person's name down, putting it into the spreadsheet, and what the course was, and when it was conducted.
Right, that's not difficult, is it? It doesn't sound difficult.
No, it doesn't sound difficult, but the training staff changed quite regularly during that period. People leaving, people retiring, increasing staff to accommodate vision training. So the way it was recorded could have been recorded differently. So. And also the fact it might not have been recorded at all on some occasions. Watch-based training wasn't always, although it should have been, wasn't always given to the training team the following day to put on the spreadsheet. So it's not a perfect system.
Right. What do you know? What the nature of the IT difficulty was, which meant that every time a training session had been completed, it couldn't be uploaded or didn't appear automatically, but had to be inputted manually?
As far as I'm aware, because STEP takes its information from STARS, whilst I believe we were on STARS, it didn't recognise us as within London Fire Brigade, because it needed recoding to accept the fact that we do these particular shifts, and also each training package has got a code allocated to it. So with operational firefighters, I think they're national codes. Right. With control, they're local codes, if codes at all, and the IT won't read it, so it needs to be coded in. So I believe it was a coding issue, and obviously changes to STARS, and of course STARS was being changed operationally at the time. That's all I can put it down to.
Did anybody, to your knowledge, bang the table and say, this IT reconfiguration has to be done, and it has to be done now?
Yes, it was. It was done on a number of occasions about IT, but again, there was competing priorities. STARS, they were doing a big operational change to STARS, which took priority over the control element of STARS, and we did have a manual. As it was a manual way of recording, so it was put down a list of priorities. But there were concerns over IT deliverables, certainly for us.
Mr. Chairman, we're a minute or so shy of 1 o'clock.
Well, I
short of 1 o'clock. But I'm in the middle of the topic, I'm afraid. There's no natural landing point.
No. Well, that might be a convenient point then, might it?
It would, Mr. Chairman, if that's convenient.
Yes, thank you. Well, Mr. Hayward, I think it's time we all had a break for some lunch, so we'll stop now. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And again, while you're out of the room, please don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else.
Okay, sir, thank you.
So we'll see you at 2 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. 2 o'clock then, please. Thank you.